Hi class, I feel your pain with all of this fun stuff. I just recorded a 30-minute lecture and something went wrong and it glitched, and so I get to do it again. Anyway, so welcome back, 1321 class. We're going to part 2 of organizations in the workplace. So remember we're going through different models, different types of organizations, and looking at how they're structured and how their philosophy impacts the communication in that organization. And why should you care about this? Because it's like it's not the most exciting stuff to teach, but it is important because you want to think about what type of organization do you think will suit you best. And what's really going to be fun is in the next chapter, chapter 3. Chapter 3 looks at your own personal communication style, and it looks at your communication tendencies. Excuse me. And there's an assessment tool that can help you kind of identify what communication style you are. What's your tendency as an employee and as a manager? And then we'll look at based on those styles, what communication styles fit best into one of these organizational models that we're talking about. So remember, part 1, we already talked about the traditional model and the human relations model. Very different, two very different models. Traditional model, the boss is the boss, the employees are the employees. Everything is very structured. Human relations model, know what makes people more productive and helps companies make more money isn't just structure and bonuses or punishment, right? Getting fired. It is tender, loving care. You need to take care of your employees' psychological and emotional needs. Well, guess what? The next one we're going to talk about is the human resources model. Very, very different. Well, not that different, but a different model, a different philosophy. Just try not to get human relations model and human resources model confused, because they're kind of similar in that way. Think human relationships among people are important, right? The tender loving care, the supportive environment, developing relationships, interpersonal relationships with people on the job. Human resources, think resourceful. Under the human resources model, human beings want to feel like they're resourceful, like their resources are being used, are being productive. So let's talk about that then. So traditional, human relations, and now human resources. And I hope you printed out your handout. Right, you have this under handouts and you can follow along. So what's the focus for the human resources model? It focuses on team participation. So teams is a key word, and decision making. That 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 employees, people working for organizations, are not just motivated by sticks and carrots. They don't just need tender loving care. They want to feel productive, and they want to feel like they have a stake in the decision making of the organization. Okay, so that they participate in decisions that impact that organization. So teams and decision making, key focus. Who are the key people? You don't have to get too bogged down in the theorists, but the key theorists are McGregor, Likert, and Miles. But look at the dates again. The 1960s. What was happening in the 1960s historically? The civil rights movement, right? The Cultural Revolution, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay, but not only sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We're focusing on diversity. We're focusing on civil rights. That was the beginning of recognizing diversity and civil rights, women's rights. Martin Luther King Jr., the Brown Berets. Hello. So that's the context. We really want to appreciate people's productivity and what they have to offer and help people participate in our country equally. And it's interesting because it's like we're going through another revolution, a second revolution. So anyway, that was the context. So it sort of makes sense that the human resources model says, no, we need to have a stake. Employees need to have a stake. And we want to be able to feel productive, like we're contributing to the organization. We're contributing our talents and our potential to the organization. So there's an equal emphasis on workers and management, a team-based orientation. Workers participate in organizational decisions. So see, you can kind of think about civil rights, fighting for equality. Here it is, making workers and management more on the same level in that respect. I mean, they still have managers, they're still above you, but there's more in a human resources model. There's less distance between management and the employees. So what's the view of communication then? Well, you need all of it, right? It's not just going to be coming from downward communication. It's not just going to be the managers and the supervisors and the presidents of the company telling us what to do. Because remember, in both the traditional model and even the tender loving care model, the decision making is still coming from the top down. But in the human resources model, the view of communication is different. We want openness and trust, and there needs to be a lot of upward communication where employees are sending feedback and sending their ideas and their what they think should be done back up to management. So there's upward, there's still downward, and then lots of horizontal, right? Lots of lateral or horizontal communication, because we're working in teams. We're doing group decision making. So those are the key things for that one. What are sample organizations? Your book says Amazon.com, Kodak, and Hyundai. But and that's what the book says, class, but I'm wondering about Amazon, right? I don't know. Maybe at a certain level, there's the human resources model, but if you've been following the news, a lot of the employees that are actually packing those boxes, they're protesting. They're upset because Amazon has not been giving them time off in terms of COVID-19 and whatnot. So I'm wondering if that's really true. If they follow the human resources model just at certain levels, and then you get down to the actual people packing those boxes, and I don't know how much. It doesn't seem like they have a lot of stake in the decision making right now, but that might be a good research paper for someone. In any case, what do you expect at a human resources organization? Plenty of communication, lots of teamwork, lots of participation in that decision making, and self-motivation is required, because you're not going to have people telling you what to do and hitting you over the head. You're going to have to be self-motivated. And self-motivation and quality control circles. That's another thing that you will typically, in a human resources model, you'll really work in teams to improve the quality of the products or services you're offering. So you'll listen to customers, you'll listen to the feedback from those customers, and then also you'll make sure, right, that your product or your service is maintaining its quality, that it doesn't fall, that you don't just the first run of that product or service is just awesome, so you can sell it, and then all of a sudden, as time goes on, the quality goes down. No, the human resources model, those teams of people are trying to always improve, maintain, and or improve the quality. So that's another kind of characteristic of human resources model. And what else? Let's see. Okay. And there's a nice little table on page 47 of your book, table 2.2, that compares the human resources model to the human relations model, so that you won't get confused. But just think resources. Workers want to participate in decision making, and communication is all directions, and teams. Team is the main thing. So let me read you, because remember, we're going to go back to that nice box that talks about the manager. So what is the view of the management style? in a human resources organization. If I could find the page, that would be good, class. Here it is. Okay, so here I am. I'm the manager now from human resources. So both the previous managers have an inaccurate view of employees and of the employee management relationship. First of all, employees aren't lazy, and they don't want to be bribed or manipulated with bonuses or TLC, tender loving care. In fact, employees want to work and will motivate themselves if they are allowed to participate in decision making. Second, successful organizations use a team-oriented approach where teams make major decisions that affect the company and productivity. The organization's climate is supportive, flexible, and trusting. Therefore, the role of the manager is that of facilitator. Very important word. I'll come back to that. Allowing employees to take an active role in problem solving and in developing their potential. Don't forget that employees must be allowed to make mistakes if you want them to be more creative. Okay, so it's more like that. So go back to our classroom analogy. The traditional instructor, where the classroom is very structured, it's very routinized, you've got a routine, there's not a lot of chit chat, you know what to expect, you do this and you're making the A. You don't do this, your grade is going down. Okay. Human relations, a looser format, more unstructured format. People are talking to each other. They know things about each other's lives. It's sort of a more open atmosphere, not routinized, not as structured. There's your human relations, very supportive teacher, that kind of thing. So that's human relations. What does the human resources classroom environment look like? That's the instructor where it's all groups, right? There's lots of group work, lots of teams. Almost every week there's a project or that is all set up. The classroom is set up in groups or teams. And what does the instructor do? They are a facilitator. Instead of standing up in front of the room and lecturing or just telling people what to do, they go from group to group facilitating, just guiding them, making sure they're on task, but they're letting the group come up with the answers and the solutions to the problems, whatever whatever task has been given to them or whatever problem. So that would be more the human resources classroom, so that's back to our classroom analogy to kind of help you, because like I said, if you haven't actually been out in the workforce, and this book's really written from a white collar point of view. You know what I mean by white collar? Like you're in business, you're working for a company. So it's written from that framework. So just kind of keep that in mind. But remember, any organization, including academia, including colleges, follow some sort of system like this, some sort of model. And a lot of times it's not, there's combinations of models. That's probably, I don't know that there's really any organization follows exactly one model, and almost all of them follow some aspect of the traditional model. It's just kind of the way it is. Not all the time. But let's move on then to our next model, which is called the systems contingency model. And don't be scared by the weird name. What the systems contingency model says, because remember, these different models are all basically saying, here's the best way to organize your company. Here's the best way to make your employees more productive. Here's the best way to make more money. Here's the best way to manage your employees, okay? But guess what systems contingency model says? Systems contingency model says it depends. There is no one best way to run the business. There's no one best way to motivate your employees. There's no one best way to manage. It is contingent upon where your company is located, the surrounding culture, the city. It depends on the employees. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on the environment. It depends on the culture. And culture is going to be a key word. So let's move through this one. Systems contingency, the focus varies depending on the situation and employee needs. Depends. It's contingent upon. So the key people are right here. You can look at them: Singe, Kotz and Kahn, Fred Fiedler. But again, look at the dates. It's late 60s, and we've got a 1990. So it's late 60s, 70s, 80s. So what came out of the 1960s with the civil rights movement and really took off in the 80s was, in terms of theories and what we call paradigms, social paradigms, was the acceptance of multiculturalism, the recognition of multiculturalism in the workplace and in society. What happens in the 80s? You have more women, okay, who are entering management positions in business. They're actually becoming managers. In the 1980s, it was like the power woman red suit, okay, because women are entering these management positions. We've also got multiculturalism, the recognition, we call it now diversity, but the recognition that different frames of reference have as much relevance as what we used to call the dominant culture. And of course, the dominant culture used to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and I'm going to add male frame of reference. Okay. And we're still going through this right now. That's what's interesting. This is almost like I don't know, I'm sure people have called it things. It'll be interesting to see what we finally call what we're experiencing. But this is like the second wave. It's like we're still fighting, or not fighting. We're still trying to progress. We're still trying to deal with these issues right now that were started with the civil rights movement and the Cultural Revolution. But so systems contingency pushes it. It's more of a recognition, especially in the 80s with postmodern theory. That is what really created this multiculturalism focus. So it depends upon who you've got working for you. It depends on the culture of where you are. It depends. There's no one best way. You have to adjust. So here it is. The main focus is the organization as a whole. There's no single best way to manage or run an organization. It depends on internal and external factors. The whole is more than the sum of its parts, and what affects one part of the organization impacts the others. So that's the systems part. Okay, the contingency is, it depends. The systems part of this model is that the organization's made up of different departments, right? Different departments, different divisions, all that. So the philosophy in systems theory is that if something goes wrong in one of those departments, it's going to impact the whole business as a whole. And so it doesn't matter that it's this department way over here and your department's over here. Doesn't matter. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. It's going to impact you. Think of the body, the human body. It's like that. The whole organization as a whole is like the entire human body. But think about it. If you break your finger, that impacts your whole body. Yeah, maybe it's just your finger that's hurting, but this completely, it sets off things in your body to go help the finger, sends more blood, you get inflammation, swelling. Then you have to adjust your whole life around this stupid finger. I mean, it's ridiculous how that can, you break something or you break your hand or you sprain it, and you have to adjust your whole lifestyle and all the things that you took for granted. So that's kind of the systems part. Go back to our classroom analogy. So what does the systems contingency classroom look like? Okay. And also it's going to depend, we're going to come back to this idea of culture. Okay. So what does that classroom look like? Well, it's going to be different. Maybe that instructor comes in and the first week, looking at the class, decides, oh, this class, I think this class needs more structure. We're going to run it a little strict here. And then discovers that's not working. I mean, the class is a dud. Things aren't working. Students are failing tests. They're not learning anything. Well, all right, that's not working with this class. Let's try to loosen up a bit. Let's try less structure and see if that helps. So we get more of the human relations model. And guess what? All hell breaks loose. It becomes chaotic. It's too unstructured. People are taking advantage of everybody and of the teacher, and that doesn't work. So she decides, maybe human resources, let's put them in teams and do some more group work. And lo and behold, that works. That's the way to do it. The grades go up, students seem more involved. So the systems contingency classroom might be a variety of all the different models to try to see what works best. Do you see? So that's sort of that is the systems contingency model. Then culture also has a strong role in this model because different organizations have a culture. What's culture? Culture is defined as the patterns of beliefs and expectations shared by the organization's members, which produce norms that shape the behavior of individuals and groups in the organization. Okay, that's a lot of blah, 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 blah. Think of it this way. You can look at colleges. Now, some of you have done this. You've taken courses at UTEP and EPCC. And if we were in a live classroom, you'd be able to tell me. If I asked you, well, hey, how are UTEP and EPCC different? And you'd be able to tell me, oh, well, at EPCC, it's like this. The culture's more this way. But at UTEP, it's more like this. So you can recognize how different organizations have different cultures. And schools, colleges are organizations. EPCC is a college. It's an organization, academia. So my daughter, for example, like many of you, she took classes at EPCC and UTEP and then was accepted to UT Austin. So she's attending UT Austin. And so she told me there's a huge difference from the culture of UTEP versus the culture of UT Austin. And some of it depends on internal factors. There's a lot more diversity at UT Austin than there is at UTEP. But a lot of it, too, is the culture of the city, the culture that the organization is actually located in. And so, Austin's very different from El Paso, very different from Dallas. And you've probably had that experience if you've had the opportunity to travel to East Texas. Very different from our side of the state. So that's what we're getting at. So the organization in systems contingency model follows a particular culture and gives the members a sense of identity. Come back to our school model. And down here, when it gives you examples, think of, I'm going to skip to Disney, then come back to school. Think of Disney World. Think of Disneyland. I don't know how many of you have been there. Disneyland, Disney World, Disney is a whole culture unto itself. You walk into Disneyland or Disney World and you literally are somewhere else. The happiest place on earth, right? It has a whole identity of its own, a whole culture of its own. So that's the idea. Or Texas A&M, the Aggies here, have all kinds of rituals and whatnot that create that Texas A&M identity. So does UT. So do the UT Longhorns, Hook 'em Horns, and all that kind of stuff gives that organization that school, that college, its identity. Okay, so that's sort of one of the ideas of systems contingency. What else? The view of communication. All types of communication are needed and all types of feedback. So upward, downward, horizontal. And of course, it depends. You adjust that communication flow. It depends on what's going on with the organization. And let's see. Yeah. And this idea, once again, that even one person can impact that organization for better or for worse. Think of your classroom. Back to the classroom analogy. Have you been in classrooms where, I don't know, there's 3 or 4 students who are really motivated, who are really good, who are really funny, and they ask really good questions and they get the class involved, and it just makes it really cool and a nice environment to be in. And then you'll have a class that you just dread because maybe there's 1 or 2 people in there that are very distracting. They're very, they bring the whole class, and not in a good way. Sometimes we have people that are distracting, but it's kind of fun, anyway. But you have people that are distracting in a bad way, and it brings the whole darn class down. So that's the best analogy. And where do you work? What classes do you look forward going to? Maybe it's the instructor, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's the people in there, maybe it's a combination of both. But that's the analogy when it comes to also thinking about these different models and different types of organizations and which ones you're going to fit best in and be happiest in. So, woohoo! Yay! I hope you're not asleep. Wake up! Hopefully you're not asleep. Now, the final model is the transformational model. Woohoo! Transformational virtual model. And did I read the system? I don't think I read the systems. Did I read the systems contingency one? And I can't remember what I'm doing. I get off track. Okay. We already did human resources. So before I move on to the transformational manager, here's the views of the systems contingency manager. Yes? Regardless of what these other managers say, there is no single best way to manage. Any model could be successful, but it is contingent, it's dependent on people and the surrounding environment. For example, a manager should consider such internal factors as employee needs, expectations and abilities, the complexity of employee jobs, and the manager's own comfort with various models. Such external factors as customer expectations, local and national economy, and competition from other organizations should also be considered. In addition, managers and employees must be aware that organizations are systems where every part of the organization is interdependent on every other part, and the actions of any one department or even one person can affect the entire organization, thus showing the critical role of communication and feedback. So there. Now, moving on to the transformational model. And let me see. Hold on. Hopefully you have your books. Laugh out loud on that. Yeah. Transformational multi-unit. Okay. So here's the final one, which I'm sure you're happy about. The transformational model is pretty much what we're doing now. Okay. With COVID-19, we've had to go online. Everything, that's essentially what has happened. So we've taken a whole educational system, both the public school system and the college system, okay, that we're doing right now as at EPCC, at the college here. We've had to take a system that relied on a face-to-face model. Okay, that was one of these other models, combinations of models, depends on the college that you're at. And we basically had to shift it into the transformational model of organizations. That's exactly what we've done. What is a transformational organization? It focuses on small, decentralized structures that use flexible and virtual internet communication or information technologies. So when you're looking at a transformational organization, there's usually smaller units. Like there's not necessarily, oh, I have to go to New York City and work at this building, at this particular building in this particular city to be a part of this organization. Okay. Think Google in California. Of course, you could argue that that's kind of transformational, but it does have its main location, and then it has other other places, but that's the main one. In transformational, you may not do that at all. You could have these smaller units. So and it's the key word here is informational technology. Look at the key people, but look at the dates. Besides Johnson, Poole, Putnam, etc., the 90s, the 2000s, okay? The information age. So that's the historical context. We get the internet, we get the information age, and we get globalization. Okay, key, globalization. We are no longer just confined to our countries. The economy becomes globalized. Hence, we need these new informational technologies so that we don't have to fly to Ireland to do X, Y, and Z all the time, or we don't have to move to Ireland. I have one of my best friends works for Apple, way up on management in Apple. She works in Austin. She's single, flies all over the world, has a beautiful house, drives a Tesla. I hate her. Anyway, I don't even want to know how much money she makes. Okay, but she does a lot, obviously, computers, really good. And her name is Juliana Hernandez, by the way. So she, brilliant, very high up in Apple. So she, of course, does a lot of obviously, working for Apple IT. She would get to fly to Ireland, but she doesn't have to do that like every week. She would still fly to Ireland to check on things and meet with the team there, but otherwise they were meeting virtually. So that's kind of what defines this sort of thing. And you want flexibility. So what's the view of communication? All communication is important, especially horizontal communication, and relationships are essential. Virtual communication and platforms are it says important, they're essential. In a transformational organization, they're essential. And sometimes you will have in these, because it talks about multi-unit, sometimes you'll have temporary alliances. So two different companies will come together to produce a product or service, and then once it's launched, that team, that group of people no longer has to meet anymore. It's launched, they go away. They don't need you anymore. So sometimes you're not going to necessarily have job stability depending upon what your role is, because think of phone companies, okay? Whoever's making that phone, like Samsung, has to come together with whoever the servers that are going to provide, right? So T-Mobile, Verizon, whoever, and they have to negotiate, right? They have to launch that product successfully. Those two different companies have to come together and meet. And then once it's launched, it's more quality control. That's sort of like a hypothetical example, but that's what we're looking at. Sample organizations: Nokia, General Electric, Johnson & Johnson, Harpo Productions, and our school system during COVID-19. That's exactly what's happening. Now, we had precedents. We had online learning, of course, and online classes, and then distance learning. But the whole system had to flip almost overnight, right? Almost overnight. And that's essentially what's happened. So we're in the middle of the virtual model. What do you expect in this type of organization? Use of electronic technology, online networks, social media. You may not meet in person, but communication and interpersonal skills are important because you're here. You need to be a self-motivator, teamwork, virtual organization and virtual teams, and at times no long-term employment, but more project-based. Once you've got the project launched, they don't need ya. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya. Okay. Again, we already talked about that historical context. And you might, in your virtual model, the transformational model, you might have a blend of all those different types of models, but it's more electronic. And I'm going to go back to our little manager box. So here I am, transformational model. Actually, none of the previous management styles works in today's global market, dominated by informational technology, IT. Constant change requires an absolute flexibility that's missing in other styles. We are experimenting with new decentralized structures, including multi-unit and virtual structures. In a multi-unit structure, each division is really an autonomous business under the same holding company. In a virtual structure, a temporary alliance among several companies with different areas of expertise, like T-Mobile and Samsung, right? Employees communicate through the internet and video conferences and may never meet face-to-face. Our employees have maximum personal autonomy and self-motivation. Most communication occurs via computer-connected teams that supervise themselves. Downsizing like change is a normal and positive part of organizational life, and employees expect to change jobs often. So there you have it. Those are and I want to come back to this idea of flexibility, because flexibility is part of this model. And I want to relate it back to what's happened with our face-to-face classes that are now online. And of course, I'm normally a face-to-face gal. I do not like this. I miss the feedback. This channel right now that I'm using, and even when we're live, and I will have another one of those. We will have another live conference for interaction, questions, etc. But even in those, there's sort of a delay. It's just not the same thing because we're not in the same time and place. I miss the energy and the feedback. Right now, I can't see you guys. I'm not getting any feedback. All I'm getting right now is self-feedback. Because you're used to the term feedback, there's also self-feedback. What is self-feedback? I can see myself. I'm looking at myself. It's quite distracting, I might add. And I can also hear myself. Okay, so this is self-feedback. But I'm not getting immediate feedback from you because of this channel. So that's something to think about. And even when it's live, you know, you kind of have to take turns and this and that, and you see everybody's little box. It's like Hollywood Squares. Boy, am I dating myself. Anyway, quite different. But let's go back to this idea of flexibility, because this platform, on the other hand, the advantage is that it does give us flexibility. One of the things that was confusing for me, for not just me, other instructors, and for you as students, was the fact that when the college went full-on virtual this semester, there are no set days and times for the classes to meet. And people are going, what? Well, when do we meet? What about that? The idea behind that, why the school did that, was to make it flexible for you, so that if people have to work 2 jobs now, maybe they have to stay home and watch their little brothers and sisters or their own kids because of COVID. That was the idea, that you didn't have to, even in a virtual platform, have to attend a class at a certain day and time. That you can access this video when you need to, you know, when there's a good time for you. So that's another, I'm rambling a tiny bit, but I'm emphasizing this because that's another characteristic of this type of platform, of this type of organization. So I thought I would throw that out. And the concept questions. And this is all going to come back to haunt you, class. So keep your eyes peeled for an announcement about your next assignment. Remember, I am redoing some of those assignments that are posted on the syllabus. I'll probably do a little addendum. But here's a concept question. Remember the main one. How are the following types of organizations defined? By the different directions of communication that we've been talking about: downward, upward, horizontal, informal, the grapevine versus formal, and which organization do you think you would prefer working for? Which type? And there is, let me see. In your book on page, on page 50 and 51, there is an instrument. It's called Polishing Your Career Skills. Which type organization fits me best? If you take this little, it's not really a quiz, it's an assessment, right? It's an instrument that is supposed to sort of assess which organization you would probably fit in based on your answers to these questions. I'm not picking this up. This is not for a grade, but it is something you might want to do to find out which one suits you best, or at least take the assessment and see if you agree with it, because that question will come back